You're listening to Psych with Mike. For more episodes or to connect with the show with comments, ideas, or to be a guest, go to www.psychwithmike.com. Follow the show on Twitter @PsychWithMike or like the Facebook page @PsychWithMike. Now, here's Psych with Mike. Welcome back into the Psych with Mike library. This is Dr. Michael Mahan. I'm here with my good friend and colleague, Mr. Brett Newcomb.
How are you today?
I'm doing fantastically well. We were talking off mic about, we did a show recently on when people wouldn't own their bad behavior. And I said, as I am wont to do, we could do a show on blah, blah. And then, I promptly forget those things and we never revisit it. But this time we said, hey, you know what? We really want to come back to that because it is an important thing to talk about. And the thing that we wanted to talk about was parenting vis-a-vis consequences / punishments. And are those things the same thing? And if not, how are they different? And what is the relationship to parenting?
Well, and what's the intent? What goal are you trying to accomplish? Mm-hmm. If you punish or have a consequence, is it so you'll feel better? Mm-hmm. Sometimes I'm so frustrated at life that I feel better if I slap my child.
Right.
Not having anything particularly to do with what my child's doing, just makes me feel better because I have the power to do that and I get relief from that. Mm-hmm. Like road rage. Mm-hmm. You drive like an idiot because somebody's in the wrong lane. Does that make you feel better? Mm-hmm. And we have spent a lot of time, both of us, counseling families around and doing presentations in school districts and so on around the whole issue of consequences for behavior. How do you modify behavior? How do you establish behaviors that you want and get behaviors that you don't want discontinued?
Right.
And it's a challenge. So we thought we'd spend some time talking about it today.
So to start off, and I didn't tell you I was going to do this, so I will give you the option of saying yes or no. You had told a story about your dad and you, and would you be comfortable telling the story?
I'm happy. Love telling this story. My dad was a very violent alcoholic man. And I grew up in a house where beatings were a regular life experience for me. And I never could predict when they would come or what they would come for. I just knew that they were going to come. Mm-hmm. And so, like a dog that's getting beaten, you just learn this is what happens when you live here. And you try to roll with the punches, literally, and survive. Mm-hmm. So that was my life for most of my adolescence. And when I got to be 16 and got a driver's license, I got the family car. We only had one car. And I got the family car. First time that I had it, going out on a date, and we were double dating. There was 3 or 4 kids in the car. And we were driving down the road, and we were laughing and hooting and hollering and carrying on. I had one hand on the steering wheel, one hand on my girlfriend's knee. And as we came around, I was driving around the curve. I got too close to the curb and hit the front end of the car into the curb and knocked the front end out of alignment and lost one of the hubcaps. I saw it roll down the hill and into a lake. And so I took everybody home, and I was dreading going home because I knew the instant I told my father that I'd damaged the family car, he would jump up in a rage and beat me insensate. Mm-hmm. So I would go in the house, and he's watching television, and I go and stand next to his chair. And he looks up, and he sees me standing there, and he keeps watching television. And a commercial comes on, and he looks at me and says, you have something you need? And I said, yeah, I need to talk to you. I wrecked the car. And I start crying. I'm really sorry. And he looked at me for a second. He said, was anybody hurt? And I said, no, nobody was hurt. He said, everything's okay. I said, well, the car's damaged, and I don't know how bad. And he said, well, you go on to bed. I'm going to finish watching my show, and then I'll go out and look at the car, see what needs to be done. So I go in bed, and I'm laying there waiting for the door to get kicked open and the beatings to commence. And I don't hear anything, and I don't hear anything, and I don't hear anything. And the night passes, and I lay there awake, as far as I remembered, all night long. Mm-hmm. So the regular time I get up in the morning, get dressed, and go in, still expecting the instant he sees me, I'm going to get punched or kicked or beaten. He's not home. And I had to go to school. I waited all day. They figured he'd come and get me out of school. I can't anticipate the level of rage that I'm going. And I finally get home, and I'm waiting at the door for Dad to come home. Dad comes home. Somebody drops him off. The car's gone. And I'm like, crap, where's the car? Is it that bad? And he doesn't say anything. And I wait till dinner, and he doesn't say anything. So after dinner, and and I'm being a perfect child. I mean, I'm washing the dishes, I'm cleaning, I'm taking out the trash, I'm doing everything I do. And finally, I approach him and I said, "Dad, how's the car? I'll figure out how to pay for the damage." He said, "Did you learn anything from this?" And I said, "Well, yeah." And he's like, "Okay, then we don't need to talk about it." And he never. I don't know what it cost. I don't know what was wrong. I mean, as an adult now, I know it front end had to be out of alignment. But we never discussed that the rest of his life. And I hated him for that because if he hit me, then I could let go of any personal responsibility. I could put it all on him. He's a mean SOB. I didn't do anything that bad. Why can't he treat me right? But if he doesn't ever say anything to me, I can't let go of it. I mean, I had nightmares about wrecking the family car. I mean, we didn't have money, and he couldn't buy a new car, and it was a real issue. And to this day, I get tied up about wrecking the car. So he figured out in that particular instance a strategy that would really alter my behavior.
Well, or it just was random chance that he didn't.
I mean, maybe he didn't figure it out at all, but it worked that way.
Yeah. But so for you, that was a more teachable moment, even though
it was a more learnable moment.
Nothing happened, right? Than if he had beaten you.
Oh yeah, if he beat me, it would have been nothing like any other.
You would have just given it up, right? Right.
Just he's mean.
And so, for me, I tell people all the time, especially parents, when we're in therapy, that our justice system is based on the concept of punishment.
Right.
So nobody believes, it doesn't matter, the most ardent believer in our justice system doesn't believe that we're rehabilitating anybody by putting them in prison.
And most people don't believe that we should.
Right.
It should be. I mean, you read articles all the time in the news media that prisoners shouldn't have color TVs, and prisoners shouldn't have air conditioning, and they shouldn't get dessert, and why should they live the life of Riley? I have to work for my life.
Right. So that's a punishment.
Yeah.
Punishments are about making victims feel better. So you're behind bars, you're getting treated badly. That makes me feel better. It's not about getting that person to change their behavior.
Right.
And the consequence is about giving the individual, the perpetrator, the opportunity to recognize that they have choices and possibly choose alternative behavior. But it goes back to, do you remember the private investigator show Beretta during the 1970s?
Yeah.
And so Robert Blake was Beretta. He was a private investigator. He had the white
the cockatiel.
Cockatiel. In that, and I was always amazed that they could train that bird not to poop, because that bird never pooped.
Well, or they interrupted.
I know. I understand. But that was the thing. And so if you don't know Beretta, you can look it up on YouTube. But there was a line in the theme song for Beretta that said, "Don't do the crime if you can't do the time."
Right.
But if you're willing to do the time, nobody can stop you from doing anything. So having a consequence is not about hurting the other person. It's about giving them an opportunity to recognize that they have choices and to change their behavior, because the cost-benefit ratio for them comes out better if they change their behavior. But it doesn't always lead to change, and you have to be willing to accept that.
So in these conversations, I would always talk to parents about the fact that consequences need to be known in advance.
Yep.
If you're reactively doing something, all you're doing is punishing.
Absolutely.
So you need to say, once a child misbehaves and you see that might become a pattern, or it's something you don't want them to do again, then you have to sit down with them, which means you have to think about it. And you have to talk to your partner, your parenting partner. And I would ask them in a conversation, what's the worst thing you're willing to do to your child?
That's a mic.
Thank you.
Yeah.
What's the worst thing that you're willing to do to your child if they misbehave? And what's the behavior that would cause you to do that worst thing? I mean, let's rank order some consequences that you think in your family you'd be willing to apply. And what would you use those for? So when you get a roadmap, then you show the map to the child.
Right.
And you post it on their refrigerator, post it on their bathroom mirror, post it on the bedroom door.
And just a second.
Yeah.
So if you identify what's the worst thing that you'd be willing to do, there are actually two advantages to that. Number one, anything less than the worst thing is easier.
Yeah.
Number two, don't
it's
use...
hierarchical. I mean, you have to work your way up the food chain.
Exactly. Don't use your thermonuclear device
Right.
if there's only one guy on the battlefield, right? You got to pick your poison. And the problem is that in our society, and we're talking about parenting, but this could apply anywhere, but most of the time, the most common way of trying to alter behavior in our society today, especially with adolescents, is grounding. And it is consistently the least effective parenting tool that anybody has, because as parents, what we do is we ground for 3 months.
Right.
Adolescents don't have the same time sense that adults have. They can't even conceptualize of a time frame of 3 months. And if you don't believe me, that's too bad. You're not a developmental psychologist, but I can assure you that this is developmentally true. Just because you don't think like your adolescent doesn't mean your adolescent doesn't think differently. You know, and parents don't understand that. And so they don't really parent effectively because they're parenting from what would matter to them, not what would matter to their adolescent. What I tell parents is, if you've got a child who drives, get one of those safes that have the combination, the tumbler lock on the front of it. And when your child offends you, you go to them and you say, okay, I hate this because I'm your parent. I love you. I only want to do good things for you. But because of this behavior, I have to give you a consequence. That's my parental duty. I don't want to do this. This is completely against my nature, but I have to as your parent. And so I'm going to take the keys and I'm going to lock them in the safe, and you can't drive for 2 hours. Mm-hmm. And the child's going to say, oh, well, that's fine. I didn't want to drive the next 2 hours anyway.
Yeah. Well,
and then the parent's going to say, oh, that doesn't hurt? Well,
okay, let's increase the, not 2 hours, it's 5 hours.
Here's the thing.
It's 4 days.
If your child says, I don't care, that means they do care. Because nobody who ever didn't care about anything ever said, I don't care.
I would not ever use that particular approach or interpretation, but what I would say is, when your child says something back like that, ignore what they say.
Exactly.
And look at their behaviors.
Right.
Because what you're trying to do is achieve a change in behaviors. And if you get it, then it works.
That child will sit on the stairs and look at that safe for the next 2 hours, or they'll walk around and they'll keep on looking at the safe. They'll keep on looking at it because they do care.
I remember my child was little, we used to use timers. You get a timeout, you have to go sit in the corner for 5 minutes, and we'd set a timer. You can't get up until the timer dings. Well, he learned to turn the timer down. As soon as we left the room, he turned the timer down. And we hear it ding. Yeah. So, I wasn't paying a lot of attention because I'd issued it and moved on. So he got himself out of timeout.
Statistically, 99% of all groundings in the United States are
self-ended.
Yes. Yeah. When the child starts doing what they were doing before, the parents look at each other and say, oh, is he ungrounded? Well, he must be because he's driving a car. Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right. So the child...
Or the parents say, well, the mom says to dad, whoever, I needed him to go to the grocery store.
I know. I have that argument all the time.
So I gave him the keys back. Now, he's still grounded. He can't drive for his own pleasure, but he can drive for mine.
Right.
And I said, did you set it up that way initially? So, because he what if he stops by his buddy's house on the way to the grocery store? So you have to anticipate all this stuff and talk about it and make a good decision as a parent. What am I trying to accomplish? What am I willing to charge to try to accomplish that? And you have to explain that to the child. It needs to be known and anticipated in advance. It has to be appropriate in its intensity. And it has to be consistent.
Right.
You don't get on out of jail free card.
Consistency is always the key.
Yeah, if you want it to work, if you want the behaviors to change. But you also can't be afraid of the consequences. I mean, you can't be afraid of the child. I mean, how many conversations do we have when we'd say, I can't get my kid to put their damn cell phone down at the dining table? I said, take the phone away from them.
Right.
Oh, I can't do that.
Right.
They need that phone. And
if
they need that phone, then they'll put it down or lose it.
I know.
And so then you get these single moms with adolescent boys and be like, well, he's so much bigger than I am. I can't physically. What if he won't give it to me? I said, who pays the bill? Go online, set up an account, turn it off online. You can turn it off by the hour. And then go back online, turn it back on. I mean, he can't use it if it isn't turned on. So go turn it off. Well, I can't do that. Well, then stop arguing about it. Don't ever use that as a consequence. Find something else.
That's exactly right. And what's so nice about, though, having those consequences be time limited is that it gives you an option to escalate the consequence. If you ground somebody forever, what do you have in your quiver? You don't have another bullet to shoot. But if you ground somebody for 30 minutes, then if they MF you, then you can come back and say, okay, that was inappropriate, so now I have to add another hour. It's killing me. Please stop. The point at which an individual chooses to change their behavior and it isn't externally imposed is the point at which they've actually learned something.
Well, yeah, I was grounded probably the last 6 months of my childhood. And for additive value things, it just kept getting weeks added. And all of a sudden I looked up and realized, I'm going off to college in September. That's 6 months away. And I can't go anywhere until then. And come September, I got ready to go. And something happened the weekend before. And my father comes in and says, okay, you're leaving my house and you're never coming back. Leave within 24 hours. Be gone. Don't come back. So that was an escalation of the consequence that I hadn't anticipated, because we had never discussed what I had done. Neither one of us thought it might happen. So it happened, and then that was his consequence. Go away, don't ever come back. And then I'm sitting there looking like, where am I going to spend the night? How am I going to get groceries? Who's going to do my laundry? All the things that were benefits for living at home that I didn't really think of as benefits because it was just there. Suddenly.
Well, and it's kind of ironic that you're saying, oh, I never thought about these benefits of living at home in the really, by all accounts, horrible circumstance that you were living in. So the circumstances that your father had given as parenting boundaries for you were pretty extreme.
They were, but to me it was normal. I mean, that's all I knew. I didn't know
but then when that was taken away, you saw a lot of what the benefits of being there were. Somebody buying the groceries, somebody doing the laundry, that you never took into consideration. And that's something that I try and talk to adolescents about is, for all of the time, my daughter just recently got married. She's 23 years old. She's a second-year med student. And when she lived here, she had a curfew up until the day she moved out. People say, "How can you give her a curfew? She's a woman." Well, she is. But guess how many adults live in my house? Exactly 2. Me and my wife. If you live you can live in my house until you're 40, but you live in my house as a subservient child. That's the only way it works. Because you know what adults do? They take responsibility and they pay their own bills. And if you're not doing that, you're not an adult. It doesn't matter what your chronological age is.
I remember conversations with parents who would say, why can't Joey see that the garbage in the kitchen is overflowing the garbage can? Why can't he pick that up and take it out?
Because it's not important to him.
Without having to be told. I said, because it's not his house. It's not his garbage. He doesn't have that responsibility. Unless you set that up with a consequence for not doing it, that he doesn't want to pay. If you turn off the phone until the garbage is taken out, then he'll take the garbage out, and you won't have to remind him because he wants the phone, and you won't have to have the argument and the roundabout and the why don't you ever and how many times I have to tell you and all that bullshit that you waste time on and emotional energy.
When adolescents come and they say, "Oh, I want to be treated like an adult," this is what I tell them is, I told my kids when they were very young. You need to understand, if you tell me you want to be treated like an adult, as much as that's going to devastate me, I love you so much that I'm going to do it. And what that means is I'm going to require you to take responsibility and pay your own way, because that's what adults do. So if you come to me and say that you want to be treated like an adult, but what you really want is to have the opportunity to make all of your own adult choices but not face any of the adult responsibility, that's not going to happen in my house. But that happens in a lot of houses.
I don't know that I would articulate it in such extremes. I understand what you're saying, but I think for me, standards of appropriate behavior are more important to me to articulate. And so you can live in my house as long as you're a courteous, responsive adult. And I may ask you, hey, will you cut the grass this Saturday? And I would expect you to say yes and do it if I ask you, but most of the time I won't ask you. But I do expect that if you're not coming home before 10 o'clock at night or even all night, that you contact me and let me know so that I don't wake up the next morning and wonder where in the heck you are, or I don't stay awake all night listening for you to come in. That to me is an act of courtesy to the other adults. I expect that the common areas of space are kept neat and clean, so you can't populate it with all your crap that you don't ever put away. You have areas of the house, your room, the basement, where you can leave your stuff out, but you can't do it in the common areas. So, because I would have the same conversation with anybody that was there. It didn't have to be my child. If somebody was staying in my home, be like, can you put this in your room?
Well, why do you hate that mic?
It's a personal thing.
And probably I should amend then what I was saying, because you're correct. And I can't tell you that my daughter never didn't stay out.
Right.
But there was for me, a time
Call
after
me before
which,
my bedtime.
Yeah,
You know when I
exactly,
go to bed.
exactly,
So,
because
go to
I
bed
don't
at
want to
11,
wake up
so
because the
call me about
dogs are barking
10:30.
because you're coming in at 4.
Yeah.
So, and she knew that, and she was always very courteous about that. But so there was a curfew.
So it's a courtesy, responsibility.
Yeah.
So if we behave like grown-up adults, then we all get along well.
Right. Well, I have an issue with the whole adult thing when people aren't paying their own way. I have a problem wrapping my head around that.
Yeah. And I understand the conflict. I don't have an answer for it. It's different for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
You have to know your own issues about that if you can know them, so that you can clearly delineate to the child. These are the behavior ranges where I have flexibility, and these are the ones where I don't. And it's not about, can we agree to disagree?
Right.
It's an absolute.
But
this, like I told my adolescent son, you will. My wife is a competent, independent, adult, professional woman who has her own relationship with my son. But I heard him one time talking to her. And I've had this issue personally. When I go out somewhere in public and I see an adolescent speak to his mother with rage and disdain and disrespect, I want to go slap him. So I told my child, you will never, under any circumstances, speak to your mother in that tone of voice, in that way, without getting a consequence from me. And I'm not trying to get into her parenting. She can handle you however she wants to handle you, and I'll support her. But I'm telling you, this is my issue. I get a visceral response when somebody disrespects my wife.
Absolutely.
And I will enforce that they don't do that. So you need to make your choices carefully here, because it's a separate conversation what's going on between you and her about your behavior.
Right.
This is suddenly between you and me about your behavior.
Right.
So you need to know the risk that you're taking.
No, I understand that completely. I told my son when he was old enough to understand, but started having some adverse conversations with his mother, and I said,
comes with the territory. It happens.
If a stranger talked that way to your mom, how would you expect me to behave? And he said, you'd have to beat him up. And I said, well, but you're my son, and I don't want to do that with you, and so you need to help me understand, how can I tolerate you doing that if I wouldn't tolerate a stranger doing that?
I feel, because what I need is.
And that actually made a lot of sense to him.
Yeah.
He said, well, I don't know. And I said, well, I need you to think about that, and I need you to come back to me, and I need you to help me understand this. And I let him go off, and a couple of days later he came back and he said, you know what, you're absolutely right. I'm 100% wrong. I can't ever do that again.
So home is a safe practice environment, because if you learn to control yourself at home, then when you go out in the world, you don't lose your job because you mouthed off at the boss. You don't get kicked out of school because you challenged a teacher in a hateful, disdainful way. Bad things don't happen in the outer world if you learn how to control yourself at home. And that's what parenting is about. And that happens better with consistent, known consequences rather than punishment.
Right.
Not an emotionally volatile reaction. Those do happen. But then you go in and apologize. Hey, I overreacted. I got upset. I was scared, what have you. But let's talk about what caused that situation to occur so it doesn't ever happen again.
Yeah.
And let's set up some consequences to reinforce that message. So if this happens again, then this will be what we do. And that's what you were having with your son.
Right. So that's a great summary, and hopefully this was a beneficial conversation for people. As always, the music that appears in Psych with Mike is written and performed by Mr. Benjamin DeClue. If you want to get a hold of the show, please visit psychwithmike.com and contact us through there. And as always, if it's Friday, it's Psych with Mike.